We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off. That some of my fictional works were in a literal sense true. I wrote out these dreams in novel after novel, story after story. To name two in which this prior ugly present obtained most clearly, I cite The Man in the High Castle and my 1974 novel about the U.S. as a police state called Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said. I'm going to be very candid with you. I wrote both novels based on fragmentary residual memories of such a horrid slave state world. People claim to remember past lives. I claim to remember a different, very different present life. I know of no one who has ever made this claim before, but I rather suspect that my experience is not unique. What perhaps is unique is the fact that I'm willing to talk about it. The only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed. Because of this, an alternative world branched off.
You know I had to play this clip from the show here at Aeon Byte. Philip K. Dick's famous Metz, France speech in 1977, September 24th, I believe. And I sometimes believe or contend that that was perhaps the turning point in not history, but the history of consciousness. I think that speech was sort of the seeds, the protoplasmate, the benign virus that got spread and has affected so many creators and filmmakers, authors, philosophers, including all of us here that you see in the screen, and including many of you out there on the internet. It is pivotal, and I always love to play it. But yes, my name is Miguel Connor, and I am the host of Aeon Byte here in this simulation, and it's so good to see everybody here. I hope everybody's doing well. For those of you who will celebrate, I hope you enjoy your Memorial Day weekend and so forth. So yes, and I love that video because the look on people's faces, if you look, this one's cropped, but they all think poor Phil is out of his mind because something like that was just such an atomic bomb on the minds of people. So yeah, in keeping, and definitely we will talk about these issues and so much more on a special show as we are joined by Paul Levy. We will redouble back to talk about his great book, The Quantum Revelation, which I'm reading again, and it's just incredible. And Paul, we will talk also during the show about a special program he has. Paul, thank you very much for coming back. And you've heard this speech, I'm sure.
Oh, totally. No, I'm a huge Philip K. Dick fan, and I'm just, really thank you so much for the invite.
Oh, always good to talk to you. I think it's our fourth or fifth time. So yes, the audience loves your Gnosis. And with us too, we've got Graham Pong. Graham Pong, how are you doing? And I'm sure you've watched this speech too.
Oh, absolutely. No, Philip K. Dick, you could almost say he crossed the Rubicon there.
That's it. He dared to say something we all knew subconsciously. That's what was behind the curtain, but there was resistance. But 2025 is just, he's always so prophetic. It's ridiculous. Never fails. So awesome. Well, Paul, again, we want to talk about a few things today, but as you write in your book, Quantum Revelation, and I agree, again, I'm rereading it. It's so awesome. I love so much of what you say, like quantum physics is like the Zen koan of science, and consciousness is the redheaded stepchild of the scientific community of physics in general. Just so much good stuff, and of course, you cover a lot of Philip K. Dick, Jung. The people are mutual influences, but you write that the way out, and I agree 100%, is through this sort of understanding of quantum physics if we want to get out of this collective mind virus that is destroying us. And it is the new spirituality. At the same time, I haven't asked you this, and if you don't mind giving us your views, the other competing spiritualities are right now AI and UFOs. What's your view on AI? Is it Wetiko, just another tool of Prometheus? What do you think of AI?
Yeah, well, AI, like quantum physics, if quantum physics gets in the wrong hands, it can, just destroy our species, or it can just benefit us, in an unimaginable way. Same thing with AI. It's like a quantum phenomena. It has the superposition of both the incredible, deepest, darkest evil in potential to enact itself through AI, or it can unbelievably serve our species. And, the thing that's interesting to me is that, so I've written 3 books about the Wetiko mind virus. And one of the chief features of when somebody gets taken over by the Wetiko mind virus is, they don't even know they're taken over. They're oblivious to it, but they become like an automaton, like a robot, like a computer program, like the algorithm is just running through them, and they have no idea. In a way, they become like a zombie. And or like a vampire, and that's really sort of the shadow possibility of AI, where with all the propaganda and the mind control going on, when somebody really if they're not self-reflecting on the nature of their circumstance, and they're just ingesting and unconsciously embodying and expressing the how the powers that be want us to see things, then we become a minion in the hands of whether it's negative ETs or AI or whatever, and then we're a living outpost for Wetiko, for the mind virus.
So basically, just be sovereign land for your consciousness is what you're saying, or as they say, the mind is a great servant but a terrible master. Same with AI, right?
Yeah. No, that's why, in essence, one of the key things I'm pointing out in my work is the way to deal with all of this like evil, this multifaceted evil that's coming at us, from all different sides, is to connect with our true nature, to, embody being a sovereign, self-reflective, open-hearted, being who is cultivating awareness. Absolutely.
Agreed. I think that's the key. It's the same solution that the ancients had, right? Know thyself, go inward, see the reality for what it is. It's not like any of us are creating anything new. We're just it's common sense.
Yeah. Well, that, like you were saying, the ancients really, exactly. And, because I'm writing a book, my next book is about the work of Jung. And, Jung actually talks about the secret church or the secret place or the inner, and it has to do with the inner going inwards and finding the treasure that is our nature. We already have it, but we don't know we have it. And, part of when we fall into the spell of the mind virus is it distracts us, such that we put our attention outside of ourselves and think the problems out there or the solutions out there. And then the mind virus just gorges on us, disassociating from our own experience and from our own self.
Very true, very true. As you call in Undreaming Wetiko, you call it is our shadow government that takes over our personality. The Gnostics call it the counterfeit spirit, and mind Paris. There's a million ways that it's been called.
Right.
And when people if people ask you, well, what's the origin of Wetiko? What do you tell them?
No, that's such an interesting question, and I've thought about that and written about that a lot, and I'm really open, whether it's like, whether it's negative ETs or a collective trauma that our species suffered from, but two, I think the most significant things, like one is in Dreaming Wetiko, the first chapter I go into what is the origin of this mind virus. And I'm convinced it's unhealed ancestral multi-generational trauma to the extent that we don't, metabolize and integrate it, then we're fated to compulsively just enact it and give it as our psychic inheritance to the next of kin. So that's one thing. The other thing about Wetiko, about the origin of it, is that when you really go into its nature, it's actually getting recreated moment by moment with our complicity. We are participating unconsciously in generating and animating and feeding this mind virus that we then experience as like something out there that's attacking us. But that's why, again and again, I point out the key thing is for us to shed light on how are we colluding with our own victimization.
Yeah, I'm sure you can relate in AA step 4 when you write down the list and how I participated in it. And as alcoholics, you're like, well, it wasn't my fault, but you still got to write what was my participation, bad marriage, bad boss, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's hard. And UFOs too. What is your take on that? I know Jung very astutely said they are an empirical reality. They are there. There's no way around it.
Jung was really focused on that, the psyche, the reality of the psyche, and so many independent people have had these psychic experiences of being abducted or having visions or whatever, and that's a psychic reality. That's not saying that it's true objectively in 3D space and time, but the fact, like if somebody has an imagination that this river in town is running backwards, that doesn't mean the river is running backwards, but them having that belief, that's a psychic reality. That's what Jung was pointing out. And, I love that both Terence McKenna and Jung had the same idea about UFOs, that we're so out of touch with our actual nature, with the self, that we've been so alienated from it that, like Jung says, anything that we're unconscious of, we project outside of ourselves and it gets dreamed up into materialization. And, that both McKenna and Jung, are in agreement that, one way of envisioning the UFO phenomena is that it's actually this dreamed up phenomena of ourself that we're so alienated from that we can only experience it as some sort of alien other. But the point is to recognize that it's a projection, that it's a reflection of our mind, and then to really own that and take that in.
Yeah. But at the same time, there's an ontological reality. We just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, well, just like the psyche has an ontological reality, but it's not just objective, but it's not just subjective. Like people think the contents of their psyche are just subjective. No. Jung's whole life's work was trying to point out there's a realm that couples the objective and the subjective. Mm-hmm. It's neither purely subjective nor purely objective. And that's, the realm of psyche, which he felt was the most fundamental reality there is. And this maps on to the UFO phenomena.
Yeah, and quantum physics. I think you just described quantum physics, right? We are interactive with this universe.
Yeah. And the universe isn't separate from us. It doesn't exist objectively. That was the pre-quantum viewpoint, that we're just passive observers, just, being witnesses, trying to understand the nature of this universe. And then quantum physics comes along and it empirically proves, no. The act each and every moment that you're observing the universe, you're actually influencing the universe observed. And I just want to point out that's a precise description of a dream, because I'm pointing out in my work that what quantum physics, you see, it's being called the greatest discovery ever in all of human history in the realm of science. That I don't know anybody who debates that, but the big controversy is, what does it mean? And I'm pointing out in my new book on quantum physics that what it means, I'm not a physicist, I'm just a curious person, but that it's actually revealing to us that we're having a collectively shared dream, That's the real central point of quantum physics. And when enough people really take that online into their minds, and have the realization of the dreamlike nature that we are part of, that we're participating, that we are both conjuring up and simultaneously being conjured up by, in a reciprocally co-arising feedback loop, then all bets are off. Because when enough of us have that realization, we discover we can hang out with each other in a way, it's what I call, we can dream ourselves awake.
Mm-hmm.
And that's evolutionary, and that's what's being offered to us.
Yeah, and as you write in your book, the issue and the problem is, again, when you had Newton and the Descartes coming up with traditional science, great, very helpful to humanity, but it lodged us from both nature, or what's outside reality, and our inner nature. And that itself sort of created a Wetiko monster, collective delusion, if you would, didn't it? And we're still trying to get out of it, and we're destroying ourselves while not getting out of it.
Exactly. Like, that's the real essence of our collective madness. We're like, with Newton, Newtonian physics, or Descartes, the idea that they split the subject and the object is intrinsic to the scientific materialist point of view, that conceives of this world as being fundamentally made of matter, and that, of separate things that are interacting. And, it's been enormously helpful. We've developed incredible technology out of that, but it has an intrinsic error at the core, at the foundation of that worldview that's killing us, because it's separating us from ourselves. And then, to the extent we become identified, if I become identified with a separate self, well, then you're an other. And if you're an other, then there's fear. And fear is the superfood for the mind virus. So, as long as we're unconsciously identified with being a separate self, which doesn't even ultimately exist, then we're under illusion, and we're guaranteed to continue to be destroying each other. And that's why I point out that quantum physics, it's actually offering us the medicine for the malady that's ailing our species.
It certainly is, yes. And again, I'm bringing Philip K. Dick, quoting again from your book, The Quantum Revelation. He called our paradigm today, our materialist atomist blindness. And then you talk about Philip K. Dick and his idea of the negative hallucination, in which instead of us seeing what is not there, we cannot see what is there. And then he called physics a magic window. So he knew what was going on.
Oh, totally. And he also, in one, because I've written 3 books on Wetiko, I think in the second one, just called Wetiko, there's a big chapter on Philip K. Dick. Mm-hmm. And he was super switched on to this mind virus. He called it the Black Iron Prison. And he actually says the key to everything is to be found in this mimicking stuff. And Wetiko is a master mime. It's the counterfeiting spirit. It puts us on, it impersonates us. It offers us a false version of ourselves. Oh, I'm wounded, I'm traumatized. And if I'm not awake in that moment to my nature, and I then put on its version of myself and identify with it, then it has me. Then it can manipulate me and can control me, And the counterfeiting spirit, that's from the apocryphal texts. So, but interestingly, I point out that, well, it got edited out of the actual Bible because Wetiko was on the editorial board and wanted to make, because, it can't stand to be seen, because if you see it, then you take away its power and we become empowered, and so that's why my whole work is trying to help people to see Wetiko.
Yeah, exactly. And as you often say, it's not about, I'm just going to reject and run and hate this thing. Wetiko has our salvation. It has the DNA of our salvation. Just like Jung would say, our shadow is the greatest teacher we'll ever have.
Right. Like if Wetiko didn't exist, we would have to invent it. It's so important. No, seriously, it's catalyzing our evolution as a species. And, and that's what's so interesting, because Wetiko is a quantum phenomenon. What I mean is that, it's in a superposition of states, and that it contains both the darkest, deepest evil and the highest good. It actually can help us to awaken. But how it actually manifests, it depends if we recognize what it's revealing to us, because it's a revelation. Because when you see what's happening in the world as a dream, which is what quantum physics is pointing at, is showing us, is proven. What when you see all the insanity and the evil that's playing out in our world as a dream, say if one individual had this dream, but we're all having it collectively, then the question is, well, how do we interpret the dream? What is it showing us? And I would point out, well, it's showing us that we're not in touch with two things, with our creative power. So then we outsource our power, and the powers that be out there are more than happy to use our own power against us. The second thing, to interpret it as a dream is like, oh, it's literally reflecting to us the profound importance of the human psyche, of consciousness in creating our experience. And as long as we're unconscious of that, then we're going to be destined to continue to dream up a nightmare. Because this mind virus, I call it the nightmare mind virus, because it inspires nightmares. But when you have a nightmare, like a recurring dream, there's a message encoded in it. And if you don't get the message, the nightmare just recurs and oftentimes gets more and more amplified. But if you get the message, then all of a sudden the nightmare doesn't happen anymore.
And do you feel sometimes maybe, and I go back and forth in this one, maybe Wetiko's not, it's better than we think, because sometimes we're not ready to face things, Paul. Our trauma, some childhood message, the reality of our society, and we're not ready, so we have to create delusions, right? They help us, well, unless they completely take over, but temporarily, can they help us?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I think, of like in fairy tales, this is symbolized a lot, where the would-be hero, they'll meet the dragon or the monster or the witch or the evil demon or sorcerer. And, typically maybe more at the beginning of the fairy tale, where they haven't really developed their sense of self, they haven't expanded their consciousness. And if they then fight with that monster, they'll get destroyed. So they have to run away. But typically in a fairy tale, as they're, and that running away isn't cowardice, it's actually wisdom. But as they run away, they typically meet like a magic tree or a talking horse, or, and that's all symbolic that, they're more connecting with their self, they're integrating stuff. And then typically at the end of the fairy tale, they'll meet that same monster again. And then if they run away, that's cowardice, and that's to miss, the moment. But that's where, assuming they've developed enough, sort of ego strength, let's call it that, and awareness, then they're fated to have it out and to potentially slay the monster, and then to heal.
Yeah, so you got to know when you're ready. And another important part of your work, and again, I'm going to bring in the occult Elvis, which you should be getting a copy very soon. And I also, in the David Bowie book, I'm writing about this too. And that's your ideas of the wounded healer, which I think is essential, because once you couch Elvis or Jim Morrison or Sylvia Plath or Ernest Hemingway as shamans, which they were 100%, they went into the unconscious and brought this art and healing spirituality, and shamans are entertainers. They wear flashy clothes. I mean, I go a lot in the book, but the wounded healer is important, and David Bowie is one of those. And in the David Bowie book, let me quote you, because I think it's beautiful. This is from Undreaming Wetiko. According to the myth of the wounded healer, it is their ability to be vulnerable, the Latin word meaning vulnus means wound, and hence capable of being wounded, and then bringing consciousness to their wound that bestows on the wounded healer or shaman the power to heal. The wounded healer has to suffer through the sickness in order to be able to cure it. This brings to mind the universal truth that only those who truly suffered and those who know suffering can relieve other suffering. Only those who bear sickness as an existential possibility within themselves can constellate the healing process in others. Because the wounded healer personally knows the experience of being wounded, They are able to bear others' experiences without the compulsive need to fix them. Healers have healing abilities not in spite of their wounds, but because of them. And then you write, we are all wounded healers and shamans in the making, right?
Yeah. Well, no, that's beautiful. That's great.
You did well, Paul, or
yeah.
whoever was channeling you.
Yeah. No, that was fun. And, and it's funny because for years I was struggling with, when people say, oh, what do you do? And, I just never really identified with being a writer or being a healer or being a, shaman, whatever. But once I came across the word wounded healer, because, 24/7, I was carrying this incredible wound.
Right.
And when I became familiar with the notion of wounded healer, and the wounded healer is the shaman, then I was like, oh, that's what I am. Because what the myth really is talking about is that the wounded healer suffers an incurable wound.
Right.
And for me, that totally happened historically in time, that all of a sudden I got wounded and I was never the same. And it could have been really problematic if I got caught in the wound or identified with it. I would have been just an endless process going to therapy and whatever, and it never would have,
Right.
really gotten better. But then at a certain point, I began, the way I began to hold the wound and carry the wound, it became a portal to a deeper place where I was able to access my creative gifts. And that, because who is the wounded healer or the shaman? It's the creative artist. It's the dreamer. It's the storyteller. And so that's why in my work, again and again, I always circle back to the real medicine for, to heal the mind virus. Yeah, you could say to connect with your true nature, sure. To recognize the dreamlike nature, absolutely. To cultivate compassion, 100%. And to really step into and tap into and express your creative nature. That's the medicine, because by our nature, we are creative beings. We're creating our experience each and every moment, whether we know it or not, but it makes all the difference in the world if we know it. And so that's why, for any one of us, because I'm in private practice and so many people come to me suffering and they're stuck and they feel, oh, I have these visions or these ideas, but I feel resistance. I'm not creative. And I really try to explore what their experience is at that edge, because it's so profoundly important for us and healing when we tap in, to our creative spirit, which isn't even a personal possession, but it's our nature. And then we become an instrument through which something greater than us comes through. And by its nature, that process is profoundly healing.
Beautifully said. Yes, the wounded healer, the shaman is picked. It's the artistic broken person in the tribe. Unfortunately, some tribes, if they can't find a traumatized child, Paul, they'll make one. Just like the CIA will make traumatized children. They're close to the source.
Yeah. No, totally. And that's why, it really helps to recontextualize, because we're all wounded. We're all in trauma. Our species is in trauma. And it's so easy to personalize it or to pathologize ourselves. Oh, I'm really screwed up. And then you'll just, attract evidence confirming in a self-reinforcing feedback loop. But all of a sudden, the idea of, there's a part of me that feels this pain or has this wound, but it's not all of me. And I could actually, like I've been saying, carry it in a way where it actually becomes part of my gift. It helps me. So, as a wounded healer, when I meet other people who are really suffering, I'm very comfortable just being present with them in their suffering. I don't feel the compulsive need to fix them, because, if I'm doing that, so often, if not always, they're just reflecting, the part of me that's in pain. And, if I fix them, then I won't have the reflection of my own pain. But the wounded healer, because they're so familiar and comfortable with their own pain, because they've connected with their self, the self, in Buddhism, it's called empty. It's very spacious. It's able to embrace the pain without identifying with it, without being caught by it. And the wounded healer, is able to embody that and just that itself, when you meet somebody like that, when you're in pain, and they're able to just see you and be present with you, that itself is like half the healing.
Very much. And that's like our favorite rock stars and authors, right? They know my pain. When you listen to a song or read a book, you're like, I feel healed just because they know me. So, like you said, that's half the battle right there, half the therapy.
And that's what you see. I just love that you're writing these books on Elvis and David Bowie, and because that perspective, what you just shared, I think, can speak to millions of us, and is not being picked up in the world. And it would just be, it's so helpful for people to really understand, oh yeah, people like Elvis or David Bowie or other, of these rock stars are actually wounded healers. And that's why we connect with them, because they've descended into the underworld of the unconscious. And typically in the myth is that the wounded healer, the shaman, they descend into the underworld, because they're being called. And it's very dangerous because you can get stuck there. But if they're able to bring back the gift, and the gift is their creativity. And so these rock stars are able to creatively articulate stuff that isn't just personal. Yeah, it's personal to them, and it's transpersonal. It's universal. That's why it speaks to so many people. So I just love that you are doing the work you're doing and writing these books.
Well, like we were talking before, I had no choice, and it has taken its toll. Like I'm sure with you, Paul, these powers, they will use us. We're their vessels, and they're demanding.
Yeah. Oh no, totally. I mean, I've people. I'm glad you said that, because typically people have no sense, because I can present, like I'm a together, coherent, person, and they have no idea how thrashed, I am, and I've had what I've had to go through to be able to access the work that I'm sharing. And but other people who are their own version of the wounded healer, they get it right away. Just like you were saying, it's not an easy gig. But when you get called, if you say no, it's not convenient, I'm not good enough, that's when you fall sick. So it's really important if it's a real calling, from the spirits or from the unconscious, psychic forces, it's profoundly important to assent to that calling.
Yeah, Jung even went farther, as I do in the Elvis book, and he said the unconscious has a million ways of snuffing out a life. If you're not aligned with your unconscious, it has no problem taking you off the chessboard and creating another.
Completely.
Creating another ego to do its bidding.
Yeah. No, totally. And that's why, he was particularly interested, as Jung, in with the therapy that he brought forth. He was particularly interested in cultivating in the person, think about it like an intimate relationship with their unconscious, and particularly with that part of us, that inner guide, whether you call it the muse or the angel or the genius or the daimon. There are a million different names. And the fact, when there's a million different names for something, it's pointing out that it's like this miracle-like higher dimensional, thing, whatever you call it. And so what he was really after was wanting to connect people with their own inner guidance, because of course this came out of his own experience. He began having an experience that there were these beings who lived inside of his psyche that, on one level were a part of him, but on another level, he subjectively experienced them as if they were some other, and they knew stuff he didn't know, and they were teaching him. They were the higher self, and he developed a relationship, like getting into an intimate relationship that was ever deepening. That's what he was after, in the work he was doing. And I so relate, because when I write my books, I feel like, I'm just the employee. When I get downloads, what I've learned to do is differentiate between when I'm in my monkey mind, which is just neurotic, and I need to not pay attention, compared to when I'm getting a download. Then all of a sudden I need to pay attention. Then I'm just in the role of, I'm in service. I'm getting a dictate from the boss, and then it'll tell me what I'm going to write about, how I'm going to write about it. And then when I do it, when write from that, it's like I'm just a hollow bone. I'm just an open instrument. And then afterwards, when I read what I've written, so often I'll be like, wow, this is great. Like, who wrote this? Because there's not an identification with being the writer.
Oh yeah, I can certainly relate. And yeah, Jung, of course, knew the risk. He used to sleep with a gun on his pillow because at one point is if I can't handle it, I can't handle it. I'm just going to end it because it was so powerful. So it definitely is for sure. Graham, we've covered a lot. Do you have any questions or remarks?
Yeah, I do. I have to agree with Paul that the amount of work required to make things look effortless is a lot more than people might imagine. And my specific question is, I'm kind of curious what connection he sees between Wetiko and the scapegoat. Because it seems like the Wetiko could be like an externalized, a version of the scapegoat.
Yeah. No, they're totally related. Like, the scapegoat, like when we project the shadow onto a person or a group or whatever, I point out that's the psychological dynamic that underlies and informs Wetiko. And how that works is like, say, for example, like say if I'm in a dream, I'm in a night dream, and I'm not like in touch with my shadow, with my own darkness, right? And, so what am I going to do? I split off from it. I want to get rid of it. I want to exterminate it, right? Because I can't admit that it's a part of me. So how do I do that? Well, I project it out. I project it out in somebody. I see it on someone else, for example. And so then in a dream, if that's my psychological dynamic, that I'm disconnected from my own darkness and I project it out, then what's going to happen in the dream? Somebody will come in who will carry my projection. They'll be embodying my own shadow. And if I don't recognize that they're just reflecting my own darkness, if I don't recognize that I'm dreaming, now I have the evidence that, the evil is out there because they're very convincingly embodying it. So I get more entrenched in my viewpoint of, I'm just pure light and the darkness is out there. And then if I amplify that psychological process, what happens? Then I try to destroy the person who's carrying my own darkness because they're reminding me of my own darkness that I don't want to look at and think about what I'm describing. Then in trying to destroy the carrier of my own evil, I'm actually enacting the very initial impulse of wanting to exterminate my own darkness. That's an internal process. Now I'm playing it out there in the outer world. And just remember, the Wetiko mind virus is an inner disease of the soul that plays itself out through the medium of the outside world. And by doing that, by trying to kill the person or the group or whoever that's embodying my own evil, I'm actually becoming possessed by the very evil that I'm trying to destroy. And that's complete madness. And of course, they're probably doing the same to me. That's Wetiko. That's why I'm saying that's the underlying dynamic, scapegoating that actually, animates Wetiko.
Well, did Philip K. Dick say to fight the empires to become infected by its derangement, right?
Yeah, and I love that he's saying the empire, that the Roman Empire is like modern day. It's happening right now, like an iteration of a fractal.
Right.
And absolutely, I feel he was such a visionary. That article I wrote about him, I mean, he just blew my mind. The more that I studied his letters, his journals, and had the realization, oh my God, he's completely switched on to the very thing I've written all these books about.
Very true, very true. Anything else, Graham, on your mind?
No, I think Paul handled it very well. I thank you. My only follow-up would be how would society overcome it? Because the scapegoat is very much used in the idea of society, achieving a psychological healthy state going forward is through that externalization. And
read a lot of René Girard would be my advice, but go ahead.
Yeah. No, I have a couple chapters on Girard in one of my Wetiko books because he so beautifully articulates the whole scapegoat idea.
Yeah, no, that's my question is what recommendation would you have for society and how to handle that rather than just the individual?
I would say I bring in Jung, and Jung again and again points out that the only way to change things is through the individual. That, when our species comes together in a mass collectively, in his words, it becomes like one big fathead, or it becomes subhuman or a monster. And the idea of individuation is stepping out of that collective mass-mindedness, and becoming an undivided individual. So this realization can only take place in an individual, but he also, one of the things that I've really just recently, the last couple of years, because I've studied Jung for over 40 years, and it's only been just in the last little bit that I've realized, oh my God, he was so switched on, to what we call in modern parlance, like the 100th monkey phenomena. He was addressing therapists, for example, and he was saying, yeah, it's easy to think you're just helping this one, patient, but by you helping them, you doing that might be, and this is a quote, the make weight that tips the scales in all of humanity, right? So in other words, any one person having realization in this moment of their own nature, owning their shadow, seeing the dreamlike nature, seeing the mind virus, connecting with the quantum, however you say it, that could be the very moment that catalyzes a change in the collective unconscious of our species.
The old save one person saves humanity.
Yeah. Because by any one person, and this is very shamanic, say if, in other words, if somebody comes, to a shaman and they're struggling, they've fallen ill, what does the shaman do? Because they're so empathic, they take on the illness, right? And taking on as a double meaning. It's like they take within themselves and they have it out with, they wrestle with it. So the shaman will take on the illness and fall ill. But if they stay stuck in being ill, then they're screwed. But the idea is what makes a real accomplished shaman a shaman is that they're able, through the occasion of them falling ill, to find their way back to their nature, to their self, and to integrate that illness. And by doing that energetically, non-locally, in a way, they're clearing the path for the client to do the same, because in the realm of psyche, we're not separate.
Very true. Yeah, very true. And going back to Elvis and David Bowie, as we were talking before, Paul, it's fascinating because, Elvis was into the occult, but David, he understood the idea of Wetiko through when he began reading William Burroughs, and William Burroughs had this idea, William Burroughs was visited by aliens, had visions, one of the first people before McKenna talking about the Mayan calendar and all that, but he had this thing about Venusian centipedes because he has a child, he had a childhood fear he hated centipedes. So they became his archetypal villain, and they would come into our brains and they were controlling all of humanity. And David Bowie took that, but he hid it in his album Diamond Dogs. It sounds like it's Big Brother Orwell stuff, but if you see some of his lyrics, he's talking about Wetiko. So David Bowie was certainly on the same path through William Burroughs.
Yeah. Well, the thing with Burroughs, he literally talked about a mind virus, and so many visionary artists and thinkers and spiritual traditions, they're all pointing at Wetiko. They call it by different names. Then they're all symbolizing it or articulating it in their own creative way. And how come that is? Because it's, I think of Castaneda in the Castaneda books, like Don Juan, teacher calls, he doesn't call it Wetiko, he calls it the predator. He says, this is the topic of topics, for shamans. And the idea is it's the most important thing there is. There's nothing more important, because if we don't shed light on this, it's going to kill us. All of us are the human species. But how come all of these people and traditions are pointing at it is because not only is it the most important thing to know, but because most people are blind to it. You see, the mind virus, it's a form of blindness, but it's such a weird form of blindness because it's a form of blindness that not only does it not know it's blind, but it thinks it actually is sighted. And not only that, but it thinks it's more sighted than people who actually have vision, And so it's so interesting because in essence, when you really get to what is going on here in our world, it's exactly like we're in a fairy tale. and the population has fallen under a spell. And then the question is, okay, what do we do? How do we break the spell? And I've been asking myself that question. And keep in mind, I'm under the spell, to the extent I haven't fully awakened.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, how do I wake myself up and deepen my awakening, but also then at a certain point be in service and help other people who are awakening? Because part of me awakening is seeing through the illusion of the separate self and realizing we're not separate. We depend on each other for our own well-being.
Very true. Very true. Yes. And for the audience, if you have any super chats for Paul, send them along and we'll get to them so we can see what your questions are. But one of the reasons Paul came here is that wanted to share a program he has, and I wanted to pull that up. In full transparency, I am an affiliate. But I should say, I've been doing this for a long time, these podcasts for a long time. And so many people have approached me to be an affiliate, from Derek at Myth Vision to scholars and so much. And I've always turned them down. Not because I don't think they have good programs, because they really do have good educational programs. But I just thought it's not Aeon Byte. But when Paul approached me, I was like, well, this is the same subject. We agree. Plus, Paul offers something which I think is needed, which is the therapies and the tools for individuation, for healing in his program. So I said, yes, I will definitely share this. There is a link on the show notes. So if you check it out, you can enroll. And it is tonight at 7:30. I will pull up the screen. But if you go there and enroll or register, you can get access to Paul's Our Education system at any time. Watch when you want it, this weekend, next week, all that. And I believe there is a rerun this weekend too, if you want to catch Paul again. But so I want to say, and the program let me pull it up now. This is Paul's, Dreaming Ourselves Awake in the Dark Times. Paul, you want to talk more about this?
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's funny. So, I've taught a couple courses for the Shift Network, and they approached me out of the blue a few months ago and wanted me, when it's a big gig, you can get a lot of people and make some money and all that. And I originally turned it down because, they require their teachers to write a curriculum. Like there were 7 classes and you have to write a curriculum. Oh, the first class is on shadow, or the second class. and I was like, no, I'm just not going to do that. That's constraining my creativity. I want to be able to just show up, just like in this interview, and be spontaneous and be myself and share what's on my mind, or tap into what's in the field or what's in the students or whatever. And to their credit, they agreed, with allowing me. I think I'm the only teacher that they've ever, said that would be okay. And, and they were saying to me, like, yeah, you're the person who they thought of who could help. Because so many, it's unbelievably crazy, dark times we're living through. And so many people are destabilized, are freaking out, are filled with pessimism and despair, and all of those things. And they said, yeah, you're like the person we thought of who could really maybe help people to navigate these dark times, And I heard that. And, I point out too that, in these intense times we're living through, it's actually easier to awaken because of the increased pressure in the alchemical vessel of the psyche. And, if you don't just dissociate and go numb or act out your addictions or whatever, but if you're able to hold that creative tension in a way with consciousness, then in a certain way, consciousness gets produced out of us doing that, out of suffering, though the tension, the creative tension of the opposites, that all of a sudden we can access our nature even more deeply. We can unlock our creative genius even more than we have. And so that's what, I'll be talking about in this free online program. But then, this is just sort of the beginning of I think there's a 7-week class I'll be teaching starting, I don't know, sometime middle of June. And then in the fall, I've decided I'm just going to teach my own thing every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Whoever wants to show up, because, as my work gets out more and more, on the nature of the quantum, on the dreamlike nature, on Wetiko, on Jung, on the psyche, and it's all interconnected facets of the same deeper jewel. More and more, I'm really getting that so many people, I think, are thirsting to just hang out with someone who's who actually has tapped into their creative nature in a way, because it's contagious when you connect with someone who's really plugged in a sense, to the creative source of the universe, which is potentially all of us. That's contagious. And just like the alleged COVID virus was contagious, well, when you actually connect with your true nature, with your true creative nature, that's contagious, and that can go viral also. So I think that's why I'm more and more, because I've had for 30 plus years all of these groups, but there are 10 or 12 people in each group, so I'm only able to connect with limited people, and I feel like, no, this is really hopefully going to be of benefit for more people.
Awesome. Yeah, here it is. Hope you guys can see it scrolling down, but yeah, check it out. You can get the replay show up tonight. It's there. I got the link, even if you're watching it, the replay on the podcast. I love this quote, very cool quote from Carl Jung that goes, "One does not dream, one is dreamed. We undergo the dream. We are the object." So again, that's the whole thing, right, Paul?
Yeah, totally. Jung was super switched on to Wetiko. He was super switched on to the dreamlike nature. He called Wetiko a number of different names. The major name, I think, would be totalitarian psychosis. But again and again in his work, he talks about the dreamlike nature. And of course, he was so far ahead of his time. That's why my next book, because I quote Jung throughout all of my books, but this next book I'm writing, I was writing this morning, and it was, it's all about Jung, trying to help people to get, just because what he was, trying to bring forth is so helpful for, the times we live in.
And what's amazing, I'm sure you read this, Paul, but that Jung knew he was at a fork of the road. And I think Elvis knew that too, where he had two choices. I can become a world religious leader, a guru, and have my own followers, or I could continue just being a scientist and collecting data. And he picked the path of the scientist, didn't he?
Yeah. But the thing which is so trippy about Jung, so he totally felt that he wanted to make psychology a science, and he thought of himself as an empiricist, and he wanted to have credibility with his colleagues, right? And meanwhile, here he was, having this profound experience of the reality of the psyche, and which is the major idea in all of his whole life's work. And by the way, like almost very few people have even heard about the reality of the psyche, and even fewer understand what it means. And hardly any Jungians are even talking about it. And here, Jung was openly saying this is the greatest discovery of of modern times in the field of psychology. And but the thing which is so trippy to me is, how did he discover the reality of the psyche? Well, there were these imaginal beings, Philemon being one of them, who were teaching Jung stuff that he didn't know. And so just imagine the dilemma Jung was in, of wanting to have legitimacy and credibility with his colleagues. And the main thing he's bringing forth is like the reality of the psyche. And if they would ask him, "Oh, how did you discover this?" Well, if he were real, he would say, "Well, this imaginal figure taught me."
my imaginal friend came up.
Yeah, totally. So, that just cracks me up.
Yeah, it certainly was, but that's what he wanted. He wanted people to know they had a soul. I think, when you're talking about what Jungian therapists do today, and now I'm talking about generally what people like Jung, which is weird, is not enough people talk about it, which I think, and Jung agreed, even Freud agreed, but the central part of Jung was complexes. Everybody talks about the shadow and synchronicity and archetypes, but I think once I understood complexes, Paul, my healing and development really improved, because
Well, that's a profound idea that he brought in, and particularly what he called these autonomous complexes.
Mm-hmm.
So the way, and it's a way of understanding Wetiko, a very
true
psychological way, because think about it, we're, our nature is whole. We come into this world, we get traumatized. What happens when we get traumatized? It's an overwhelming experience. So we split, we disassociate because we can't integrate it in the normal way. We can't symbolically express it in the normal way. So then a part of us splits because of that trauma. And if we don't then do our work and integrate it, then what happens? That split off part, that autonomous complex, it develops a seemingly independent life and will, like an autonomy of its own. And we subjectively experience it as if it's an adversarial, like an entity, when ultimately it's a part of our own wholeness. Now, these autonomous complexes, indigenous people, they would call them demons. That's what a demon is. And that's what Wetiko is. It's actually a split off part of our own selves. And, and the thing is that unless we really go into, the work of assimilating, metabolizing, integrating, and having the recognition that that's a part of us, then it gets conjured up to be against us, and because we all, I think, can relate to that. Yeah, there's something, we have our visions and our intentions and our dreams, and yet there's something in us that's against us, that, I have this resistance, I feel like, this judgment or whatever. And that, you see, one of the edges I have against all these love and light people, because there are people who won't read my work on Wetiko because they don't want to give any energy to evil, and I point out, well, if you're avoiding, if you're turning a blind eye to Wetiko, you're unwittingly feeding the evil you're avoiding. You're actually avoiding relationship with yourself. But like, for example, in Buddhism, the idea of, the highest ideal is the bodhisattva, and the word bodhisattva means the person in the process of awakening. And who among us isn't a bodhisattva in training, just like we're a shaman, a wounded healer in training? Well, the greatest book on the bodhisattva ideal is The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva, who's really the epitome of what a bodhisattva is. And what is he saying in the book? He's saying there's something in my mind that's doing black magic, that's creating sorcery, that's numbing my awareness. What is that? He's literally pointing at Wetiko. He's doing the exact same thing I'm doing with all my books. But meanwhile, a lot of new age love and light people are just so resistant to anything having to do with the dark,
Yeah, well, the yin yang symbol has a dark side. I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, it's just part of the cosmic structure, the dualism. Yeah.
Right. And what Jung says is that the way to become enlightened, I mean, this is a paraphrase, is not by envisioning figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's what it's really about. And the thing which is really interesting, he has this word in that theodromia, which basically means when something becomes really extreme in one way, it turns into its opposite. And I'm, in my current book that I'm writing, I bring out, that might be really operative right now because things are getting so dark and crazy. We're approaching an event horizon, and God only knows, or the shadow maybe only knows too, what's going to happen. And then, but I'm pointing out, there's a real possibility that because the darkness is getting so extreme, and it's an alchemical myth, it's a Gnostic myth, it's an archetypal myth, that the light will go into the darkness and disappear and become invisible. And then you think, it's all dark, the light's gone, but the light is actually imperishable, and it transforms the darkness from within the darkness. So this might be a time of incredible awakening and transformation, but it all depends on us. And I would even be more specific. I would say it all depends if we recognize, you see what Jung said, he says the greatest problem of our time is that we don't realize what's happening. And then he clarifies, he goes, what's happening is we are having a direct encounter with the darkness of the soul, with the darkness of the unconscious. And, you know, so, and that's the shamanic descent that we're all taking part in, you know. And so the idea being, if enough of us have the recognition of the dreamlike nature of the Wetiko mind virus, of the quantum, there are a lot of ways of saying the same thing. Then all of a sudden we become empowered agents that can really be in service to the field. But if we don't recognize that, and if we just react out of our program, conditioned, fear-based selves, then we're doomed.
That's what Jung said. He said, yeah, the psyche created the nuclear bombs, but nobody knows the psyche. We don't know what the psyche is, but it's run amok, creating nuclear bombs and declaring wars and creating viruses in China. Nobody better not say that.
Yeah, you better not say that. Right, totally.
Yeah, but that's why I like your work. And again, I advise people to check out your course. Definitely buy your books. They are, again, educational, entertaining, artistic, and they offer solutions, which is what we need today. But yeah, as we get to the end of this, as always, fantastic interview. Graham, any last question or remark on your end?
No, I just want to thank Paul and keep on doing the good work, encouraging people to wake themselves up.
Cool. Yeah, thank you.
Wake up, wake up. Awesome. Well, everybody, good to see everybody at the chat. Tomorrow we will keep the excitement. We have a show on cryptics, skinwalkers, and other creatures, but we offer the solution of how to understand another therapeutic show. So I think you'll enjoy it. But we are at the end of this show. Graham, thanks for keeping us company.
Oh, always my pleasure. And it was great to spend some time with Paul again.
Yes, indeed, Paul. Thank you very much thank you very much for coming on the show. I'm still working on the accent, Paul. Bear with me.
Right. No, totally. No, I just want to thank you guys. It's just really my honor to be here with you. So thank you.
Yeah, no, enjoy it too, as always. So yes, for everybody else, thanks for being here. And yes, as I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth, keep waking up and keep going inward. Or as Peter Gabriel saying in the Carpet Crawlers, maybe he was talking about Wetiko or centipedes, you got to get in to get out. Take care, everybody.